Jermaine Dupri, one of the legendary producers, engineers, you know Jermaine Dupri, Mr. Welcome to Atlanta, all of that stuff like that, man. That guy has been an icon, cultural icon, mogul in the hip hop, R&B industry for decades. You know what I mean? All of us know that name. It's a household name, and we're all familiar with that. So there's this video that popped up this week, and somebody shared it with me, said, man, you should definitely check this out. And so Jermaine was basically saying that the youth of today in R&B, he said that R&B doesn't sound the way that it used to sound, or it's not as dope as it used to be, because, you know, the kids, the youth, the, you know, musicians of today, they didn't grow up in church, or they're not going to church, or they're not a part of the church environment. So I thought it was a really, really interesting conversation. So let's kind of take a listen at what Jermaine said, then I'll give you my thoughts on it. This is from, I found this clip on this podcast. I think these guys are called Illinois. So let's check it to see what these guys are saying about it.
That church band grooming, like B. Cox came from the church, right?
Right.
Jodeci comes from church. Like, so when you listen to that soul, that soul that you think is soul, it's
that's coming from over there.
It's an added piece of information that if you're gonna make these records, it's hard to beat Jodeci when you don't have that element.
You don't have,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting, you know, conversation, because like he said, like some of the groups and stuff that made like 90s, early 2000s R&B, these guys were church boys. You know what I'm saying? They all grew up in the church. They all, you know, cultivated their talent and their gift in the church. There was a video where I watched, I think it was R&B Money podcast with Tank and all this stuff, and he was interviewing the guys from Commission, and then they were talking about how like they, Tank and all of those guys like that, were talking about how like they drew their influence from them, from Commission.
In my mind, it's Commission that led to 90s R&B. Mm-hmm. This whole thing that, you know, everybody goes back to, this very special time for our generation, for sure. The essence of what our R&B is. It goes back to Commission.
And Commission was a church group, you know what I'm saying? Like iconic church group, 80s and 90s that ruled the airways, but they were influencing a lot of 90s R&B as well. So let's keep seeing what Jermaine is talking about. Let's keep this dialogue flowing.
You don't have that soul, you don't have that.
That's an element. So it's like when people be saying, yo, music ain't the way it used to be. Like I just posted my new Anthony Hamilton record is coming out October 4th. Yeah, Queen, right? Yeah. Anthony Hamilton comes from the church.
Yeah.
You're not gonna get that that's in his voice. Yeah. You ain't just getting that from being on the internet. That ain't getting ready to happen.
That's what Jermaine Dupri had to say about things. I mean, he believes the church influence provided artists with a certain, you know, soulfulness, depth in today's R&B. Yeah. You know, and I gotta say,
he right.
Yeah,
I agree. I totally agree that, you know what I'm saying, that there's been a lack of the influence of the church. And so a lot of people don't know this when it comes to like the kind of connection between church and music and how it has influenced pop culture for the last 100+ years. Classical music, the classical music era, you know, that we talk about, the Baroque era and all of these different eras of music, when you study music history and all of that stuff. Every one of us had those music history classes, you know what I'm saying? We learned about all these different eras. All of that music was predominantly Christian, you know what I mean? And it was all, you know, centered around, you know, Roman Catholicism and all of those different areas and all of that stuff like that. And, you know, I'm not saying that there was no secular music within that thing, but it was primarily Christian music and Christian influence, and in the Renaissance period and all of that stuff was Christian influence on culture. You know what I'm saying? And so when you rewind that and bring that into today's time, you start to see the influences and inflections about, you know, where jazz and gospel and all of that, you know, jazz was influenced by gospel was influenced by jazz and blues, and all of these different genres kind of rooted out of, you know what I'm saying, the gospel thing. And so, yes, a lot of today's producers, a lot of today's musicians, a lot of today's, you know what I mean, tour musicians, all of those things, they all kind of came from the church. I know my guy, Kyrie Taylor, I think is his last name. Kyrie, I mean, he's Beyonce's, musician, you know, their band, you know what I mean? Them boys are church. They're all church musicians. And so I really agree with the stance of that influence. And so because there's been a decline overall in just church attendance, you know what I'm saying, especially in the 2020s, you know what I'm saying, in this inflection point that we went through and that we're going through. Today, I want to introduce to you Loop Elements Pro. This represents a very innovative new way of using loops. And guess what? It's standalone, not only as a plugin, but it's also standalone outside of the DAW, which means you can now use loop elements in your live performance. This isn't just a plugin. It's the ultimate tool for creatives and producers. Whether you're layering loops, creating click track, creating beats, building arrangements, soundscapes, Loop Elements Pro gives you the power to create without limits. Loop Elements Pro is now available. Go get it now. With that influence kind of dying, you're seeing that come into what, you know, is happening in the mainstream, because a lot of people don't know and don't, you know, ascribe to it, or don't really understand the aspect of that Christian culture directly impacts secular culture, whether we want to agree with that or not. So let's keep seeing what these boys got to say. I'm gonna listen to a little bit more of this, and then we'll kind of move on to the next thing.
Hey, Ashley Nicole was sitting here, and she was telling us how she started off in church, right? And in that interview, I was like, "Do you know, by a lot of musicians and singers and stuff not going to church, there's certain notes they don't even know. You know, instead of having a coach, church was the coach. You learned how to hit these notes and know your range in church.
You learned soul. You learned me.
Yes. So that's a good point right there, you know what I'm saying, to make. And I shared this on our Hangout podcast, and I had with Kenneth Leonard, and I think I had Jamel Kimber on that pod. Church is that space of obscurity that you get to kind of grow in and learn in as a musician, as a creative. You know what I mean? Like all of us, you know, at some point, especially myself, like I spent 30 plus years serving in the church as a church musician, as a media director, you know what I'm saying? Being a church musician, I learned how to perform music, how to write music, how to arrange music, how to produce music, how to create tracks, how to do all those things. And then when I started getting into the media aspect of what we were doing in our church, then I learned how to build websites. I built two websites for the 2 campuses that we had at our church. That taught me web design. That taught me HTML. That taught me coding, that taught me all of those things from working inside of the church. You know what I'm saying? Like being the media director taught me sound, taught me mixing, taught me all of those different things like that. You know what I mean? Taught me how to use a camera. You know what I mean? Like I started my YouTube channel doing stuff for showing how I was incorporating technology into the church. So I really think it's a dope thing to understand. And I've said this over the years on many, many occasions in many different ways that, you know what I'm saying, church musicians are superheroes. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think if we leaned into that and understood the powers that we have, you know what I mean, will continue to blossom, because you're that guy. I've said this before. You're that guy or that gal that 5 minutes before a church service, the praise and worship leader came to you and said, you know what, I'm feeling the spirit shifting. You know what I'm saying? And we're not going to sing How Great Is Our God this morning. We're going to sing Alabaster Box by C.C. Winans. And you like, oh. And so you, at any given point, you have to have that repertoire like ready in your head. And even if you don't, you can go like put your AirPods in, and in 5 minutes, listen to it and be ready to play that song as soon as it starts. You know what I mean? That's a superpower, and a superpower that I think a lot of us don't lean into and don't understand. And we devalue ourselves as church musicians, or we devalue ourselves as gospel musicians or gospel producers, when it's so many different things and so many different aspects that come and go along with that. You know what I'm saying? Like gospel producers are heavy arrangers. Sometimes we over arrange. You know what I mean? A lot of times we over arrange. But the fact is, there are things that in chord structures and arrangements and sound choices and sound design that the world covets. When they do tours, when they do all this stuff, they're calling gospel cats to do these tours. You know what I'm saying? They're not calling regular R&B musicians. They're calling the church drummers. They're calling the church because they got the chops, they got the licks to make those shows interesting. You know what I'm saying? A little bit more of this, and let's see what we're saying.
You know how to make it feeling. You know how to come from the gut. That diaphragm.
That's funny.
You know
what I'm saying? And if you can't sing at church, you can't sing nowhere.
That's true.
At all, at all.
If we was to go, if all the R&B singers today have to go to church to sing, a lot of people wouldn't make it.
Nah,
because auto-tune.
Yeah, that's funny.
That's ain't.
Well, that's good stuff. But I think that's the value that I would add to that conversation, and that there's a lot of underestimation on how church, in our Christian culture and our Christian music and worship and production culture influences the secular world. And I think what Jermaine said and what these guys are saying is a prime example of it. But I'd like to know what you guys think. Let me know down in the comment section, and we'll tap in over there.